They grew up watching institutions fail quietly, promises dissolve slowly, and authority lose credibility, learning early that stability was temporary and success required vigilance rather than belief. Gen X observed prosperity arrive unevenly, often followed by layoffs, inflation, or silence, shaping an understanding that progress could reverse without warning or apology. They were told to work hard, yet watched effort go unrewarded, promotions vanish, and systems shift rules mid-game, producing skepticism rather than rebellion. Money was not imagined as freedom, but as insulation, a thin barrier between autonomy and dependence, teaching caution rather than optimism. While other generations were sold dreams, Gen X absorbed patterns, noticing who survived downturns and who disappeared quietly from the social record. They learned that visibility attracted pressure, that security favored those who moved discreetly, and that silence often protected opportunity better than confidence. Success appeared less about talent and more about timing, positioning, and endurance, a lesson absorbed through observation rather than instruction. They internalized restraint as intelligence, patience as survival, and emotional distance as a tool, not a flaw. This generation does not chase outcomes loudly, because they remember how quickly circumstances can change and how little applause matters afterward. Their approach to money and success feels colder to outsiders, yet it is shaped by memory, caution, and an intimate familiarity with disappointment. Gen X approaches money as a stabilizing force, not a symbol of identity, viewing financial resources as protection against instability rather than validation of self-worth. Their decisions reflect consequence-focused thinking, filtering choices through risk exposure, downside protection, and long-term survivability rather than immediate upside. They internalized delayed gratification before it became fashionable, not as virtue signaling but as a practical response to unpredictable economic cycles. Emotional regulation plays a central role, as they learned early that panic compounds loss while composure preserves optionality. They distrust linear progress narratives, preferring adaptive strategies that allow recalibration when systems shift or incentives quietly change. Money is treated as leverage, a means to maintain autonomy, reduce dependence, and exit unfavorable situations without negotiation or explanation. They rarely assume fairness, understanding that systems reward positioning more consistently than effort, shaping a pragmatic rather than idealistic worldview. Risk is not avoided, but segmented, controlled, and entered with exit awareness, reflecting a mindset shaped by repeated exposure to volatility. They value competence over charisma, reliability over promise, and discretion over visibility, especially in financial and professional environments. Status is understood as fragile and reversible, encouraging them to prioritize resilience over recognition and influence over admiration. Their patience is strategic, allowing others to reveal intentions, misjudge timing, or exhaust themselves through unnecessary motion. They see time as an asset that compounds quietly, rewarding consistency, preparation, and the ability to wait while others react impulsively. Relationships are evaluated through stability and reciprocity, not intensity, as emotional and financial entanglements are treated as long-term liabilities. They learn to read institutional language, identifying gaps between stated values and actual incentives, adjusting behavior accordingly. Money decisions are rarely emotional, because emotion once carried consequences they could not afford to repeat. They prefer optionality over optimization, keeping paths open rather than maximizing single outcomes vulnerable to collapse. Their confidence is understated, rooted in survival rather than success, shaped by having endured multiple cycles of disruption. They separate identity from income, reducing vulnerability to status loss or economic downturns that dismantle self-perception. This mindset produces quiet accumulation, strategic withdrawal, and an aversion to unnecessary exposure in both wealth and career. Gen X success psychology is not ambitious in appearance, but deeply intentional, forged through observation of how quickly security can disappear. In workplaces, Gen X professionals often speak last, watching enthusiasm fill the room before quietly identifying risks others ignore, shaping outcomes without claiming ownership. They maintain modest lifestyles even when income rises, preferring financial slack over visible upgrades, remembering how quickly comfort once evaporated. In meetings, they notice who overpromises, who deflects blame, and who survives quietly, storing behavioral data rather than reacting emotionally. They are less impressed by titles, knowing how easily positions dissolve during restructuring, mergers, or shifts in leadership priorities. Career moves are calculated around exit potential, flexibility, and downside risk, not prestige, creating paths that appear conservative yet remain resilient. They save aggressively during good years, not out of fear, but but from lived understanding that favorable conditions rarely announce their ending. Socially, they avoid financial comparison, recognizing that visible success often masks leverage, debt, or instability beneath the surface. They invest time in learning systems rather than chasing trends, understanding frameworks outlast fashions and provide transferable advantage. In negotiations, they remain emotionally neutral, allowing silence to pressure others into revealing urgency, insecurity, or imbalance. They are comfortable declining opportunities that increase exposure without increasing control, even when those opportunities appear impressive externally. Their homes reflect function rather than aspiration, optimized for longevity, maintenance ease, and psychological calm rather than status signaling. They mentor selectively, preferring to share perspective rather than instruction, allowing others to discover consequences independently. When crises emerge, they move early and quietly, adjusting positions before panic spreads or narratives solidify. They often maintain parallel options, side income, secondary skills, or networks, preserving mobility without announcing contingency planning. In friendships, they value consistency over charisma, gravitating toward those who remain stable across circumstances. They notice how people behave when resources tighten, recalibrating trust and distance based on revealed priorities. They resist overcommitment, understanding how obligations compound and reduce leverage over time. Their decision-making appears slow, yet outcomes arrive with surprising efficiency once conditions align. They rarely celebrate wins publicly, aware that attention attracts expectation, scrutiny, and dependency. These patterns reflect a generation shaped by reversals, where success is designed to survive disruption rather than impress observers. Emotionally, Gen X developed restraint as a survival mechanism, learning early that visible reaction often invites pressure or exploitation. Their memory is long, retaining patterns of institutional failure, broken incentives, and silent layoffs that shape present caution. Cognitively, they model scenarios pessimistically, not from despair, but to ensure preparedness across multiple outcomes. They exhibit loss sensitivity without paralysis, balancing awareness of downside while maintaining capacity for deliberate action. Trust is conditional, formed through repetition rather than narrative, as promises once dissolved without consequence. They internalized uncertainty as normal, reducing shock when plans fail and enabling faster psychological recovery. Their nervous systems adapted to instability, producing calm during volatility that others interpret as detachment. They separate emotion from execution, allowing feeling without allowing it to dictate irreversible decisions. Scarcity during formative years trained attention toward weak signals, early warnings, and subtle shifts in environment. They develop skepticism toward authority, not as rebellion, but as pattern recognition shaped by observed inconsistency. Control is prioritized internally rather than externally, focusing on choices and positioning rather than outcomes. They avoid over-identification with roles, understanding how identity collapse amplifies financial and emotional damage. Caution coexists with courage, expressed through selective risk rather than constant exposure. They learned that resilience is quieter than ambition, built through optionality and psychological distance. Social comparison is minimized, reducing vulnerability to envy, shame, or performance pressure. Their thinking favors systems over personalities, recognizing that structures outlast individual actors. They often anticipate regret more than reward, shaping decisions toward durability rather than excitement. This mindset creates emotional insulation, allowing steady function during chaos without numbing awareness. What appears as emotional distance is often calibrated presence, designed to preserve clarity under stress. These deeper mechanisms reveal a generation wired for survival through instability, shaping a distinct approach to money and success. Some viewers notice that these patterns mirror their own quiet instincts, an unspoken preference for analysis over reaction, and observation over noise, suggesting recognition rather than instruction. If this way of examining power, money, and behavior feels familiar, continuing to observe through this lens can deepen understanding, not as guidance, but as shared attention to hidden structure. A common myth suggests Gen X lacks ambition, when in reality ambition was redirected towards stability, autonomy, and survivability rather than public assent. Another misconception frames caution as fear, ignoring that restraint often emerges from accurate memory rather than emotional weakness. Many assume well-thinking is aggressive, yet this generation learned that aggression attracts resistance while quiet positioning avoids friction. Success is often imagined as visible progress, though Gen X witnessed how visibility invites vulnerability during institutional correction. The belief that risk equals bravery overlooks how unmanaged exposure repeatedly erased capable people from economic relevance. Some confuse delayed gratification with lack of desire, missing how disciplined postponement preserves leverage and choice. The narrative of meritocracy collapses under their experience, having seen effort detached from outcome during economic restructuring. Wealth is assumed to bring certainty, yet Gen X understands certainty as temporary and prepares accordingly. Frugality is mistaken for limitation, though it often functions as strategic bandwidth rather than deprivation. Their skepticism is labeled cynicism, despite being grounded in observed inconsistency rather than pessimism. Independence is misunderstood as isolation, though it often reflects avoidance of entanglements that reduce optionality. They are thought to resist change, when in fact they anticipate it constantly and adapt quietly. The idea that money equals freedom ignores how poorly structured wealth creates new forms of dependence. Gen X does not romanticize success, because they witnessed its reversibility and emotional cost firsthand. These misconceptions persist because quiet strategies rarely advertise themselves or seek validation. Gen X learned early that systems shift without warning, and those who survive are rarely the loudest or most celebrated. Their approach to money reflects memory, not optimism, shaped by cycles that rewarded preparedness and punished assumption. Success became less about arrival and more about durability, the ability to remain standing after conditions change. They move through life with a calibrated distance, close enough to engage, far enough to retreat when necessary. Wealth, for them, is not aspiration but architecture, quietly constructed to absorb shock rather than attract attention. They understand that power is often exercised through absence, timing, and the option to walk away. Their restraint is not emotional emptiness, but a refined awareness of consequence and exposure. What appears as detachment often conceals deep attentiveness to patterns others overlook. This generation does not seek to be remembered loudly, but to remain positioned when narratives collapse. In that quiet positioning lies their true definition of success, one shaped by survival, memory, and an unromantic understanding of how the world actually moves.